I do this for fun. Entrepreneurship is something that I'm passionate about, and so anytime anybody breathes the word entrepreneurship, startup, I'm there. That's my super strength. Today I'm delighted to welcome Rich diMonda to talk about regulatory stuff. So he'll talk about regulatory strategy that you will need as a life science company if you're thinking about a life science company developing products or diagnostics, any of the different ways you can enter the life science entrepreneurial pathway. Rich is going to help us walk through strategy. And a little bit about Rich. He is a trained electrical and biomedical engineer and has been trained in business he has an MBA. He has over 30 years of medical device commercialization experience and has worked in many different kinds of companies, private, public, and has also worked in new medical device and health IT ventures. He has executive management as well as a regulatory, clinical research, reimbursement, product management, product and marketing experience. My God, there's a lot of experience that he has. He has lectured and mentored in Georgia Tech and Emory through their educational programs, has mentored several student teams for their entrepreneurial efforts, and has worked with faculty entrepreneurs during their startup journeys. Most recently, he's serving as the medical device commercialization advisor for the South Carolina Regional Authority to help develop medical device startup throughout the state. So that's Rich, and I think he should talk and I should stop. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So, as she was saying, for the last...
1 second. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
So sorry. So while you're getting that teed up, so for the last 7 years, I've been part-time teaching and mentoring multidisciplinary student and faculty teams, both here in Georgia and in South Carolina at different universities. And when I first started doing this, I did it at Georgia Tech. And the goal of the programs typically are to teach science folks how to make a complete business plan and understand the full range of what has to be presented if you're ever going to raise any money. And I found that the business plans were horrible. And they had brought in consultants to teach the students, a little bit about regulatory, clinical, and reimbursement. And the plans were still horrible. And so what I'm going to present to you today is what I think I've evolved that works to teach somebody who knows absolutely nothing how to become sophisticated pretty quickly. And the teams that I mentored eventually using this methodology of learning the stuff that you don't know anything about, they won big prizes at national competitions, and they were able to withstand serious criticism from what I call $700 an hour regulatory lawyers and sustain themselves well. So, and that's why I kind of developed this, what I call Dummies Guide, to developing an integrated business strategy. And the reason the business plans were so poor is these areas of regulatory, clinical, and reimbursement are very difficult if you don't know anything, right? And so what happened was, after we got successful at making the students competent, one of the professors, Wilbur Lamb, suggested that we try to package this somehow. So what I did was I made a series of 5 little videos, and it's on the CTSA website. I'm going to cover a lot of that today. I'm going to shorten the reimbursement one a little bit. because I don't think we'll have enough time to get through everything. But you can, you don't have to furiously take notes, because most of what I'm going to say is going to be in those presentations. The total listening time is between 45 minutes and an hour. And I'm telling you, if you do that, you listen to that, you'll become quite capable. Now, I found that if the students did that, and then I had 2 meetings with them, they were good, and the strategies were very solid. Okay? So this is kind of what it looks like. And I mean, the first module is, why should you be interested in this? Well, the problem with a lot of faculty-related initiated research is it's not cognizant of what ultimately might be required. And you wind up having to repeat a lot of stuff, because you might think you're smart enough to do some study, but the agency and other people may not feel the same way, and you'll wind up repeating it. So that's one reason to kind of get clued in on this. And we'll cover regulatory, a little bit about clinicals, and something on digital health, which is like the rage now, of course, all the different iPhone and watches. I broke my Apple Watch and started buying Chinese watches, and they equally work poorly. Anyway, I will talk a little bit about reimbursement. So the underlying principle of what you should walk away with here is to kind of unlearn, in a certain sense, what the creativity and the originality kind of concepts that they teach in school. And what I'm going to tell you is that your goal to be successful in this area is to plagiarize and to figure out who has done something similar to what you would like to do and run down that same path. That is the way you can cut through all the acronymal confusion that's associated with the topics I'm going to cover today. So that's the main lesson here. Figure out who's gone down the path. Now you might say to yourself, well, go down the same path. Well, my thing is a new whatever. Irrelevant. Because if your thing is trying to cure pancreatic cancer, I can promise you there's 50 other people that have tried to get an approval for that, and many have gotten it. You just need to see what those people did. And I'll show you how you can get real smart, real fast if you take that approach. And also the other goal is, in arguing yourself through the agency's related activities, you want to say, it's totally different than what you do in an investor presentation. In an investor presentation, you're going to say, my thing is nobody's ever, it's totally different. When you go in front of regulators, you say the exact opposite. My thing is exactly like this, but it's got a little bit of a wrinkle here. And that's how you gain better traction, and you avoid getting what I have gotten in the past, the 10-page letters, that you have to spend 3 months answering. So you're the same man. The next 2 slides are high level, but they help you understand, I think, whether or not you should even work on what you think is your invention. And the first one here has to do with evaluating the clinical value proposition. Is your invention, where would you land on this graph? On the graph we've got, on the x-axis we've got lower, same, higher cost, and we've got lower, same, higher on the y-axis for quality. And by quality, I mean, are you really making a difference in someone's outcome, someone's clinical outcome, okay? Well, it's pretty obvious, higher cost, lower. There's a lot of spots on here that you don't want to land, okay? Surprisingly, this spot, that's what most owners think they need to be. They think they need to be there because their thing is so much better, they should get paid more. And I'll conclude with what you need to do if you're in that spot and you believe that. Again, same cost, lower, that makes no sense. Lower, lower, all right, same, well, why do that? Obviously, higher quality, better outcome, lower cost is good. Lower cost, same outcome, that's a good one. And my favorite one is same cost, but a better outcome. And if you're over here and you think you deserve this, your job is to move this way and persuade people that you're really not charging any more. Now, that's not the easiest thing to do, especially if you think you're going to argue with insurance companies and payers that, well, if you keep this person with me for 5 years, nobody cares about it. They care about short-term impact. So it's a tough thing, and it's better to realize the challenge you face if you're going to try to be over here. It's a hard road. The other thing that I like to do is to test the value proposition against what I call the stakeholder analysis. So if you look here, obviously it's got to be good for the patient. You may or may not need reimbursement. You have to get through the agency. It can't be a problem for the hospital. Any one of these stakeholders that has a problem with what you're doing, you need to figure out how to solve that up front and not, kind of hide in the sand. A lot of people hide their head in the sand. Well, I'm not going to worry about that. You need to worry about everything right up front because certain things will kill you at the end. The two really interesting ones here is the physicians and the clinical alternatives. Oftentimes, people don't objectively evaluate what else is going on and how well does that work. Doctors don't necessarily like to change what they're doing. And physicians, they're proud of learning to do certain things, and sometimes change is not the best thing. These are subtle sorts of issues that are important to kind of evaluate. And for physicians, I kind of came up with this checklist. I call it the trifecta. Now, I've never been to a horse race, track, but if you don't know what a trifecta is, that's when you're able to call, the first and the second and the third horse. That's trifecta. So this is my trifecta for your convention. If you think about these three things, you're going to gain a physician's interest and his or her support. Obviously, they do care about whether it's making an improvement for the patient or not. So you have to argue that this thing is going to make an improvement. Secondly, and here's where it gets interesting, is it really better for me as a person, me as a physician? Is it going to be hard to learn? Is it going to take longer for me to do this thing because of your invention? Is it going to cost the hospital more and then I have to argue with the institution about buying the thing? And as I was referring to earlier, am I just more comfortable with what I'm doing now? I'm good at it, I've learned how to do it. So they're going to be asking themselves those questions, and you better be ready to address them. And lastly, although it may seem crass, can it make me any more money? That's kind of a big deal. And the reason is, if you look at a graph of a physician's income, and you start here at 0, they get up to a certain level, and they have a standard of living that they're used to living at. And then what happens? The procedural fees get cut. And in order to maintain that level of standard of living, they have to do more work. So most physicians, especially if they're procedurally based, are not happy because they're having to work harder over the years to keep their income at the same level. So they're always interested in this. Don't dismiss it as something that is not real. It is. Saving them time is an equivalent value to them because they're staying later at work, having to do more procedures, more paperwork, and everything else, the EMR, etc. Okay. So now, with those three things in the back of your mind, you can think, do I really want to do what I think I'm going to do? Because if you can't register well on that grid, you should self-question whether you want to spend your life, trying to move forward when you may have a lot of trouble getting it adopted. Let's assume that you got something good and you passed that first screen. So I'm not going to go through the crazy history of the FDA. It's been around for, over 100 years. And why do we have all these regulations? Well, the reason is people behaving badly. That's why we have laws. people promoting, and some of these slides could be joke slides. I don't know if they're real, but I have one real one for sure that I'm going to put up. You know, advertising things like this. This I don't know if Coca-Cola really, you know, promoted this for babies or not. This one I think is real. I mean, I think people used to think that cigarettes were good for various respiratory illnesses, believe it or not. And it was this kind of selling tonics and, you know, also the inability to control properly drugs that triggered the whole creation of the agency. Now this one, I found this and I thought initially it was a joke. And just yesterday I said, well, maybe this is a joke. But I looked up this guy and like he's real. Okay, this is a real thing. This is in the 20s and actually in the main historical museum, this is the thing that the guy was pushing for many years, for about 30 years. And that was actually an ad in Popular Mechanics. Again, I thought it was a joke initially. Okay, so we'll come back to that because I'm going to use that as a vehicle for teaching you how to find stuff. Okay, so you know, trouble started and laws were passed, and eventually in 1906, the agency was formed. Endless iterations over 150 years when you think about it. But the serious requirements that we know today really popped up in the 50s and the 80s. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on medical devices because mostly I've done that in my life. And so there's only 3 things to know about medical devices. Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3. Class 3 is very scary. You can hurt someone. And that's like a drug. Class 2 is, oh, this is similar to something else that's been already approved. So we may let you slide with some bench tests, or we may ask you to do some clinicals, but we're going to cut your break. And then Class 1 is things like scalpels and, you know, simple things. And all you have to have is a quality management system to make sure you're doing whatever you're producing is done with a quality standard. Now, so this one is the one that's most interesting, and most people try to seek this out. And the big deal is to prove, me too, is to prove that you're similar to something else. And this is a word for your regulatory vocabulary. You say that to people at a party and they'll really think you know something. Predictive, okay? And meaning that you're trying to say, I'm similar to another technology that has been used for something similar, so it's the same application, and it's using the same technology. And if the technology is a little different and not too scary and might not hurt anybody, they'll let you in on this Class 2 category, and you might get away with just bench studies and nothing else. I actually appealed to the agency on a respiratory thing that I was working on, and no clinical requirements needed. You can go and argue this type of thing. Okay, back to the hack. So, as you can look at me, I had some interest in this, you know, when I first saw it, because my head is not what it used to be. That's what my head used to be. I had a hell of a lot of hair. But by the way, this is my wife. We met in high school. We're still married, and she looks a lot better than I do at this age. She still looks very similar to that. And by the way, just as an aside, one of the good things about a picture like this that I learned from somebody is take a picture of yourself that really is unflattering and put it up by your desk. Because if you're having a bad day at work, you can look at it and say, I have gotten better. Think about that. I keep a few of these. I have many of them. This is just one. Anyway, sure enough, I get on a plane after finding my favorite, you know, ad here. And the airline magazine has 2 hats, laser hats. And what really attracted me was it had a claim in here that the FDA cleared it. I couldn't believe it. So I said, I have to research this. And the process that I use to research this is how you can become really knowledgeable about researching things. It's very simple. The simplistic approach is don't go to the FDA's website because it's a very bad website. It's very hard to use. The difference between you and a regulatory affairs expert is they know how to use the website and you don't. So the strategy is to go and use Google, and I'm going to teach you one critical search term to use, and it will deliver you to the FDA's website. And then there's another site called clinicaltrials.gov that the federal agency supports, and everyone that does a trial for the purpose of getting some clearance, they have to post everything on this website. Tremendous resource. So here we go. Open up Google, you type in FDA clearance hair mask. That's the laser hat, okay? And the summary, you know, it gives you a couple of places to go in the FDA website. So I picked this one first at the bottom, the 510K summary. And here's the summary. It's a letter, basically, and it has information in it. And I was shocked to see that they did 2 randomized, double-blind, controlled, multi-center trials. I mean, wow. I thought this was a joke, you know, but they actually did some research. So I was initially impressed with that. In that same letter, you can learn important things like who made their submission. And one of my tips is if this person doesn't work for the company, go hire them. Because they've been down the path, they've experienced all the issues that you're going to experience if you're, in this case, trying to make something very similar or treat hair loss. Then if you look at another hit that comes up with just putting FDA clearance hair masks in there, you're going to find that it dives you into the FDA's website. And if you do that, it's going to take you to a page that lists that company, and it lists their approval number. It could be K if it's 510K, it could be PMA if it's a more sophisticated approval. So every clearance of any kind or any approval is got its own little box on the FDA website. So that's helpful. So let's look at that box more closely. It gives you a classification code. This is the regulations that has been determined that a laser hair comb, whatever, is going to be required to do. So if you click on that, you can see that general requirement. It says it's a class 2. And you know, when it's a class 2, there's certain things you have to do. Then if you click back on that particular grid table, you click on summary, you're going to get all kinds of interesting information. It takes you back to the letter. This lists all the predicates that they use to say me too. So that saves you searching work, right? Because somebody else did the work for you to figure out who had something similar. This one here I'm going to look into, Redo and Wonder Brush. I don't know what that is, but it sounds very good. And here's the thing, if you go to the FDA's website and you type in something like, you know, lasers for hair growth devices, it's out of control. Even if you type in hair masks, okay, you're going to get 50 entries, you're just lost. So use Google, and what you'll find is as you go into that FDA website via Google, you'll start to get more comfortable with how to use the FDA's website. Another thing to do is the agency occasionally, for repetitive submissions, will publish guidance documents. And those are very important to read. There are many of them available. You need to find out if there's one related to your area of research. Okay? And another way to do that is put into Google FDA medical device guidance documents. You can put drug, you can put whatever. It'll take you to a directory, and you can look through it and see if you find a guidance document. Very important, because They're giving you insight. Now, an obvious question here is, how can I get somebody's actual submission? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be helpful if I could grab hold of something that was similar to what I am currently trying to do? Well, you can. It's called the Freedom of Information Act. Trouble is, you got to wait 2 years, unless you get lucky. And getting lucky means go to this company called FOI Services. And if you go onto their website and you put in the FDA's approval number for a product, and you click search, which I did for HairMax, bingo. There's their whole submission, 418 pages, $665. You can't make a better investment than to get somebody else's submission. The reason is it discloses everything they went through and all the ugly correspondence that happened between them and the agency, meaning all the hard questions they asked them. You can see what the agency's concerns are. Now, admittedly, companies get the opportunity to redact or wipe out certain things. Doesn't matter. It's still good. If there's a heading that says they did these tests and they decide they want to eliminate something under there, that's okay. You still know you have to do these tests. Yes?
If you wait for 2 years, it's $600.
No, it's free.
It's free.
It's free. Yeah, it's free. Right. If you want to wait 2 years, it's free. I just bought for a neuromodulation. Where's the neuromodulation thing? The neuro. Okay. So, yeah. I just bought for $650, 1,500 pages of Cyberonics original PMA. And I'm working on some neonatal stimulation for.
Is that the vagal nerve stimulation?
What's that?
Vagal nerve?
Vagal, yeah,
Oh, wow.
vagus nerve. 1,500 pages. I mean, admittedly, 600 of it was when they had some trouble and they killed some people, and they went on for 600 pages trying to resurrect what happened after they got inspected. But the other 650 pages was their actual application. It's got everything in it, all the stuff that you would need to submit. So it's a tremendous guide. And if you can find something even close to what you're doing, it's very valuable. So I like this company. I would highly recommend you use them. Let's move on to clinical matters. So basically, if you do all those things, just like I said, which doesn't take very long, all of a sudden you're way up the learning curve here, way up. And you didn't need to know all the acronyms associated with the agency's stuff, okay? So I want to talk a little bit about another thing that's important is to figure out what your trial might be and what it would cost, how long it would take, all that sort of stuff. It's very overwhelming. And a lot of people, when they talk about clinical research, they're worried about, statistics, it's very difficult, it's very complicated. That's the cheapest thing to hire. You don't worry about that. You can hire that for peanuts once you figure out what you need to do. So you don't have to worry about the math. That's my first point. That's easy to hire. And so what I did for the HairMax was I went into clinicaltrials.gov and I typed HairMax into the search engine, and here I got 5 studies that they did. And this is really helpful for a lot of reasons. Well, I got to look at the first study. I stopped after looking at the first study. I mean, I'm sure that the other studies were more impressive, but this one, 9 people, they had about 49 patients, 9 of them dropped out and they were using the thing. But the more interesting thing is that they were counting hairs, I guess, in a certain area of the scalp. I don't know how they did this. I have no idea. But the standard deviation was, almost higher than what they were trying. So it is completely meaningless. I'm not saying that this is a joke or anything, but because maybe the other studies were more sophisticated and they actually did demonstrate something. An important lesson, though, for this is that something that the agency will be more lenient with something that's very safe and might be beneficial. That's an important thing. So if what you're doing is very safe, they may not be as demanding of you. Now, what I really love about this site is it has everything. It has the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria, the study endpoints, the statistics that were used. It shows the results, and very importantly, it shows when the study started and when it ended. So instead of what students typically do is they go into Newsweek or Time Magazine and read that a drug takes $50 million and 10 years to get approved, which is wrong. You can figure this out yourself. You can figure out what a study costs. Because if you sketch the trial design off of what somebody else did, and you know this is how long it took, all you have to do is send that to one of the 1,000 clinical research organizations that exist, and they'll give you a quote. And so you have some idea of how long it's going to take, and you have some idea of what it's going to cost. Very simple, very easy, not very mysterious. I also love that they list all the researchers. These people, you know, they're done with hair max. If you have had another hair device, go talk to them. Why go talk to them? Well, they might be a good investigator. They might have been a high enroller. They might have been a good site. Also, they usually will tell you all the troubles that they have along the way with recruitment, with other practical issues that you need to understand if you're going to manage a trial. Okay, so this is another great resource. You can mine these studies for a lot of good information. Okay, let's move on to digital health. This is a big area. I mean, it's wearables like the watch. It deals with disease-based applications, apps that are trying to encourage patients to take the medication. It covers a large and growing area, including what probably is the most popular thing is, oh, let's grind on the data and be predictive. Okay, everybody's trying to do that now. So that's the area of digital health, just the scope. It's very broad. And you know, the regulatory landscape for this has been changing. When Joe Biden, you know, right before he left office, he pushed forward the 21st Century Cures Act, and he did that to try to push the agency to bring things forward for disease management more quickly through the agency. But what he did was it forced the FDA to issue 2 policy papers on what they call clinical and patient decision support software and the whole arena of digital health. Okay, so I'm going to tell you like a little bit about what those were and how you navigate that. But to dumb it down and make it really simple, anything that's being used for your own personal health or fitness or to monitor how many hours you're sleeping, this thing tells me that occasionally, it's not regulated, okay? And if it's not intended for the device to be used by a physician for diagnosis or treatment, it's also not a medical device, okay? So let me give you an example here. Let's take the Apple Watch, right? You know, they were showing heart rate and everything, and they decided, you know, I think we want to go for something more. And what they decided to do was try to see if they could get a clearance to detect atrial fibrillation, rapid heartbeats over baseline heart rate. And in 2018, they got a clearance, Class 2 clearance, and over the counter. Wow. I mean, on the surface, that sounds pretty impressive. And they did a respectable study to sort this out, by the way. They spent some money. And what they proved is, for a single lead ECG, as a comparator, they could pick out AF from sinus rhythm. Good, impressive. However, here's the qualifications that are in their label, which is very revealing. Users should not take any action without consultation with a physician. It's not intended to replace traditional diagnosis or provide diagnosis. Yes?
That does not mean that the Apple Watch can, I mean, it means that it could mean that the Apple Watch can do all those things, but they don't want to get into that fray. So they want to step back and keep
And that's
themselves-
obviously what they did, because they could have tried to argue that this was medical advice. And I think the kicker is the last bullet, which I thought was totally hilarious. Here it is, you research to prove yourself as being capable of detecting AF, and you say it's not intended for people with AF. What the heck? What is that? That is the large number of lawyers that Apple probably employs. And they put the brakes on this thing and said, listen, man, we're in the entertainment business, the cell phone, but we don't want, the first time somebody gets into trouble, they'll be suing us because they know we have deep pockets. So this was a legal thing. Very interesting, but it doesn't mean everybody's behaving this way. Take, for example, AliveCor. They went through the same process and they have an algorithm to pick out AF, and they have a very full clearance. And the way you can see that full clearance is read their indications for use, okay? Displays ECG rhythms. It can pick out atrial fibrillation. It can be prescribed and be used with the physicians, and physicians prescribe this device to people, okay? Intended for use by healthcare professionals, okay? That's a label that means something, yes.
I was going to ask, why did Apple pursue the medical device classification in the first place if they had to then?
All I can do is guess at what is a very good question. You know, the thing is, they're a very visible corporation, obviously, in the world and in the US. I think they saw all this stuff going on and they started to get nervous. They said, you know, we're putting out these watches, we're showing the heart rate. You know, maybe we need to protect ourselves. Let's go for an FDA clearance. The thing about an FDA clearance, even though it's trouble to get, it's protection. It's protection against liability, and it's also something to promote. They can say now, which they do, FDA cleared. Cleared for what? You saw the qualifications, cleared for nothing, but it's FDA cleared. So marketing, definitely, you know, one of the reasons they did this, and liability management. Hey, our thing was approved by the agency. I'm sorry if you died today when you're on the treadmill and you were looking at that and, you know, your heart rate got too high and you died. But we went through the processes that were reasonable to protect you. We got it FDA cleared. It's all lawyer driven here. That's the way we operate in this country, by the way. You know, not practice. So in this company, I guess they're not worried about it, you know. It's different. You put your fingers on it, read it, take a reading, interact with the doctor, and they're a small company. So let's look at predictive analytics. What are these things? Well, to identify populations at risk, to, you know, score people, you know, that who are at greater risk for getting a disease, maybe. A big reason for these programs is to help avoid and identify patients at risk so they don't bounce back after 30 days of discharge. That's a big fine that the hospitals are experiencing now from Medicare, is that if you discharge somebody and they bounce back 30 days later, you get fined. And you can look on the Medicare website, many hospitals have been fined millions and millions of dollars for that. So that's a motivation for these software packages. And you know, sometimes it's to predict unfavorable outcomes. For example, at Emory, they've been running this software program for quite some time now that tells you in advance of 24 hours who's going to become septic, just by looking at what's in the EMR, okay, as the patient's in the hospital over time. And of course, then what they do is they say, hey, this person could become septic. Hit them up with drugs, do something, okay? Identify these patients that are at risk. Because if the patient becomes septic, they're in the hospital longer, the hospital doesn't get paid for that extra stay. So it's a big deal. So people are doing that. They're using algorithms offer the EMR data to be predictive about patients at risk. And of course, genetics, you know, you're familiar with, I'm sure, what's going on there. So, you know, here's the definition for clinical support. First of all, excluded is anything with a medical image, or if you're generating a signal. If you're generating a signal, no, you're a medical device. If you're looking at an image, you're a medical device. So that's not decision support. But it's intended for displaying or analyzing or printing basic information. And typically what these systems will do is they'll suck on the EMR data, right? Analyze it, and then deliver something back. So they're displaying information that is in the EMR as well as what their prediction is. And it's intended to support or provide recommendations. Okay, that's cool. That's what these things are supposed to do. And this is, the lawyer must have spent a month writing this next one because it's a little convoluted. But here's the kicker, is that, and it's a design, it guides the design of your app. A physician or a healthcare professional has to be able to independently review the basis for your recommendations. That's a kind of a hairy thing. How does that work? But it's not the intent that a healthcare professional will primarily rely on the recommendation. So in other words, the way you get around this convoluted thing is you post all the things that the doctor might want to look at to make a decision. And then you give your recommendation. That way they have an independent way to look at it and not solely rely on your analytics recommendation. And that's the way to get around this. But that's a kind of hairy thing because, you know, independently review the basis, you have to publish a study, I guess, and persuade people, whatever. Anyway, here's my suggestion if you're into this space. It's generally not a device. It's unregulated. There are some things going on in the agency that is going to try to get people credentialed in this way, but there's no pre-market clearance, so you can put it out in the market and tell the agency that, you know, I'm doing this, but, you know, it's not a medical device. However, I think if you're a company and you're making one of these software products, you'd have to be nuts not to be in compliance with a quality management system. For liability reasons, I think you better validate, like Emory's, you know, thing. One of the things I recommended to them was, it's fine that it works here, and you've proven it here with your patients and grading patients, whatever, but maybe that hospital in Pennsylvania has got a different situation going on. So you better take your model, you better take historical data, validate it against that. If you don't do that, and they get a bunch of bad advice, you know, what are you going to do? How do you defend yourself against that? So people are launching these things, I think, without fully realizing what some of the implications are. And you got to provide, you know, an upgrade, and you got to keep it current. So if you're going to do this and sell it to hospitals, I think you'd better pay attention to this. This is not an FDA requirement. This is business sense. Good business sense, okay?
What's the name of the Emory company?
Well, I don't know. They got a big grant from somebody to develop this. I don't know that they've.
They're not a
I think
company.
it might be called Deep Health.
Deep Health.
Gary Clifford is the one.
Oh, okay, okay. No need to say more.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's into everything, that guy. I mean, there isn't anything he doesn't touch. Very creative guy. He's a lot of fun. Okay, let's talk a little bit about reimbursement. I'm going to kind of cut this one a little bit. How are we doing on time here?
We have 10 minutes. I was just hoping maybe there are questions.
Yeah.
So
Well, this
maybe-
is going to go quickly, okay? Because a little video does a better job than what we do, and I had to kind of cut it because I was time. So, you know, what you want to understand about this is the basics. What is it? Why do you need it? And you may not need it, okay? Who do you get it from? I'm not gonna cover that, that's a nightmare. How do you get it? You know, that I'm gonna touch a little bit on, okay? So the basic issue that you face when you develop any product is, you know, when you do the product development is, you know, can you make it work, right? Then you get regulatory approval, and is it safe and effective? That's what you're doing to get the regulatory approval. And then you enter this other zone. Health technology assessment is a common acronym. Can you remember that in your vocabulary? In the reimbursement. And there, is it safe and effective all over again? You have to reevaluate that. And is it, and this is in insurance terms, is it reasonable and necessary? Because if there's another alternative and it's cheaper, you'll find yourself in trouble, okay? They won't give you reimbursement. And the thing that's important here is, you know, you've probably seen these curves about the chasm where everybody crashes, and, you know, you got the original technology enthusiasts and the visionaries over here. But for disruptive technologies, if you don't get reimbursement and have your legendary work done, by the time you get here, you'll never get this adoption. And that's why they call it the, you know, the death valley, or valley of death. So that's part of your planning for your business-related work before you launch. And the basic process is you've got to do good clinical trials. It's got to sustain peer review. You got to get key opinion leaders and the specialty societies related to what you're doing on board. They got to speak positively about you. Then you got to chase reimbursement. And then that leads to the watershed of physician adoption, provided you're still in the mode of listening to the trifecta, you know, scenario, okay? So there's three big buzzwords for reimbursement. One is coding, and that's the language of individual codes that describe procedures, and coverage is all the payers have to decide whether they're going to cover a certain code. And all that means is they say, we'll cover it. But the problem is, will they pay? And oftentimes there's a lot of companies saying we're covering it because it sounds good, and then they pay a fraction of the dollar of what is being asked or being charged. And so payment is very, very important. And it's a very diverse thing. It's not like one payment throughout the country. Every local area, every local insurance carrier has different ideas of what they're going to pay. And that's why this is a nightmare. But if you take a simple approach to it, you know, do you really need a new code? Because if you're going to do the Me Too thing and say, even for a drug, I am the same as this other thing, just start billing against that code, and that's it. You don't have to go any further, if that's going to pay enough, okay, for you. So the simple thing is, get on somebody else's code and pioneer this. Now, the people who put those codes in sometimes are very specific. Like, you know, they'll put the technology in there. If your technology is a little different, then all of a sudden, oh. But you can still argue to use that code. The payers will go along with it. Getting a new code is not the issue, okay? You can go to the AMA, it takes about 6 months. You appeal to the AMA runs the code creation, ICD-9 and CPT code business. You go there, 2-page document, I've done this, you get a new code, you know. Okay, now you got the code. You still don't have coverage or payment yet, but the code is not the biggest problem. So how do you research this? Because it's a very tough area. But once again, I'm going to bring you back the same fundamental principle. Copy what the other guy did. All right? And here I'll show you what to do. Now, it turns out in the reimbursement area, there's some very good information available nationally for free. I'm going to give you a lot of resources to tap into there if you want to look at that. But you can also subscribe for a month to sophisticated software package that will actually tell you what a code is getting paid in, Newark, New Jersey, believe it or not. So, there's a lot of information available to help you get an idea of what payment actually is. And you subscribe for a month and then cancel. It doesn't, and they give you a month free anyway. I've done this already, because when I work with students and faculty, you don't have a lot of money, so that's what you do. But the key thing is comparables. So let me tell you the story of reimbursement companies. At first, it appeared to be unethical to like tell people how to code for your invention. And so what companies did is they went to reimbursement consultants. Reimbursement consultant would put their letterhead on top of a piece of paper and they'd write down the information. And then the companies would hand it out, the sales force would hand it out. And 10, 15 years ago, that was kind of viewed as, maybe it's not ethical for us to be telling people how to code. Well, that's over. Companies have massive websites that tell you exactly how to code. Let me give you one example, okay? And every company has this. Medtronic. This is a neuromodulation device. Here's the diagnostic codes you need to hit on if you want to prescribe my device. Okay. Here are the procedural codes that you want to use. And by the way, you take it in, you take it out, you can get paid every single time. Okay. Bang on all those codes. That's what you do, hospital. And in this case, you can get paid extra for a little test kit for a test lead or something or other here. So it's completely clear. So all you have to do is look at a company's website for how they are currently recommending reimbursement. And if you're doing something highly similar, there's your guide. And done. So, and there's a lot of resources, like I was referring to, a lot of databases that count the number of procedures, so you can use that for market analysis. This is one of the groups that I've subscribed to in the past. It tells me how much they pay in Newark, New Jersey. And there's other databases that are, I think, very valuable. All of this is inside the slideshow. Another thing is every insurance company posts technical evaluations of technologies, new technologies. They have a committee. Blue Cross calls it the Technology Evaluation Committee. Other ones called it Health Technology Assessment Committees. Just look up, Blue Cross Blue Shield, type some new thing next to it on Google, and bang, there will be their policy. It's very detailed. They review the clinical. And basically, their goal is to say, no, that we shouldn't pay for this because it's not like, really ready, even if it has FDA approval. FDA approval is no guarantee for reimbursement. That's some ways that was a good thing, but they just used to opine on that, frankly, and led me to go down one of my projects in the old days. And that got fixed by regulation. They can't opine on that value aspect of it. They just have to talk about, is it safe? Is it effective? So anyway, these are a bunch of resources. And I'll just wrap it up now by saying, what did we learn here, hopefully, today? Well, first, I think you can rely on yourself to figure a lot of this stuff out. And if you think you can escape dealing with this in life, you're very wrong. Because there is no regulatory consultant or clinical consultant that's going to know as much about what you've invented as you do. And you are going to have to write, whether you like it or not, most of the application. In fact, that's what I've done in the past. I've written the application, and I get the $700 an hour lawyer to edit it and read it. Because sometimes I say things that aren't good, and I don't know any better. So they are an English editor, and they bring me to the agency, take me by the hand. That's all I use them for, because they don't know what to write. So that's why you can't avoid this, even though I know a lot of faculty say, well, let somebody else take care of this for me. I'm like, you're stuck. Whether you like it or not, you're stuck. So try to realize this is not so horrible. You need to get a little bit involved in it. And the basic philosophy is find what someone else did that's similar to you, that invented something that was used for the same disease that you're chasing. That's the best way to go. And then copy it. You know, if somebody else was working on a cure for X and they went through this pathway, the agency is not going to let you go over this way. They're going to force you to go down the same pathway. Why? Because if they did this, these guys would sue them for giving you preferential something, you know, that was undeserved. Now, they do change requirements over the years and make things a little bit easier sometimes, so things get known. But more than often, I would say almost 90% of the time, you got to do what the other guy did. And so if somebody else did it, figure it out, buy their PMA for $650. And you'll become very knowledgeable very quickly if you do this. Okay. So anyway, that's my dummy's guide to a very confusing bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe add a little something to what you just shared. So in regard to going to the FDA, a lot of that background information was like super helpful, like how to navigate the summary of approvals and things of that nature. There are also regulatory consultants that you can enlist their help for. So in addition to that lawyer, there's folks that are at ex-FDA, folks that, you know, ex-pharma, things of that nature, that might be able to help you once you've done that legwork and put your plan in place, or they can review it, or they can help you with that plan. And there are also folks out there that write those packets, so that can be very daunting. To Richard's point, there is a lot of legwork that you can do to be very strategic, and also I guess a little bit more discerning with, you know, budgets, because we do understand this, you know, when you're at this stage, there's this balance of you want to do quality work, but you also are constrained sometimes by budget. So there's a way to kind of do some legwork and then also enlist some folks that have expertise to kind of check work and help you out.
Yeah. There's judicious use of experts. And by absorbing some of what I'm saying, you can be more judicious. If you think you can just turn it over to somebody, you know, you have what happened to me when I first started to get into this is, you know, I got a binder and it had tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. It was blank. And the regulatory person gave this to me, and well, who's going to write this? Well, you're going to write it. Because they don't have any idea what to write. But they can tell you what to write, and on the FDA's website are outlines for what you need to write. It's not a mystery. Okay? It is very helpful to get guidance from someone if you've never done this before. I don't want to advocate that you can go it alone. But if you're going to hire somebody to do everything, you're going to spend a whole lot of money here, and you're going to wind up doing most of the work anyway. So get your head straight. that you know, you're going to have to write a lot of the submissions.
I want to thank you, because I think the self-reliance part is very important, and also the fact that, you know, the little money like $600, $1,000 that is going out of your own pocket, think of it as an investment, because it is also showing that you're putting your skin in the game, right? I mean, if you're expecting your organization to be supporting you for such small pennies, then you are very risk averse and you're not willing to go the distance. So it just shows how much you care about your project.
A couple of questions from online.
Oh, great.
For the FOI services website, what dictates the price of the documents? Is it based on demand? Are there potential discounts?
Well, typically it's the number of pages. Big ones cost more than the little ones. Now I had a recent experience just last week where, you know, I had some students helping me, and this thing with Cybronics, we picked something, and it was like, we thought it was the PMA. It wasn't. Paid $650. I looked at the thing, and it was not what I wanted. I called them up. They gave us 3 other documents. I now have 1,500 pages of stuff, including the PMA. So they're easy to work with, And I think it's well worth the money if they have it. If they don't have it, you're kind of out of luck. You gotta look for something similar. But it's really the fastest way to get yourself up to speed. They have drug stuff too. It's not just for medical devices. You can put a drug PMA in there, and if they got it, you can buy it. And typically it's about $650, $750 for long ones, generally. Yep.
Yeah, I apologize for being late and hope if you covered this before, just let me know.
Sure.
That information. So we have an interest in patient apps and doing self-monitoring and some decision support in collaboration with coaches and their physicians.
Right.
And so the question I have is, I've read, but I don't know enough about it, obviously, that as long as the patients are simply tracking and then, using some judgment about what to do in terms of engaging the care provider, it doesn't require regulation. Is there some nuance to that?
A lot of this stuff is what you, as a company, let's say you have a company, you make an app.
Yeah.
It's kind of what you got to be careful what you say. Okay, because what you say, people could come after you for. So if you just said, this is an app for the patient to use and to transmit this information to the physician, you're not saying the ugly words, reliance upon this, all those ugly words that bump you back into the medical device arena. Okay, you're not saying those things. So you got to be careful what you say. And that's fact, a lot of the times I've been majorly controlled by regulatory people when I work in a company, because I would say a lot of outrageous things. They say, you can't say that. So you learn quickly to be careful about what you say. What you're doing is unlikely, very unlikely to be regulated, and you need to be registered, because it's the patient, you're tracking what the patient's doing, and and you're occasionally just sharing that with the doctor. You're not managing them or diagnosing them. Right. So I think we're kind of off the rails. Yeah, Christy.
So another question is, when you're asking questions to investigators of another competitor, are you potentially exposing yourself? What's the risk there? I guess exposing your technology?
Well, you always got to be careful about what you say to anybody. Typically, it's not a problem, and the reason typically it's not a problem is everybody in the university setting likes to publish. So most of the time, they've published pretty much everything that you would say to anybody. And what are you going to say to someone? I mean, I generally think it's not a big problem. It is a problem if you think the physician or researcher is an ongoing consulting relationship with the company. I would not go there, because then they're just tracking you. If that, I would never use a guy that had a consulting relationship. But a lot of times physicians, once they're done with one company, they're looking for the next one to do the research project. So I wouldn't rule somebody out who had a consulting agreement necessarily, but if they have a current agreement, I would probe their conflict of interest right up front. Just because you don't want whatever you tell that person to be ported, on a high-speed line into your competitor, who can then try to up their product or whatever against what you're doing. So you want to control that. I'm also, everybody's high on websites and all that nonsense. I mean, most of the time, I think it's like a bad idea. You're just alerting people to what you're doing. And if you want to have a website, people who are smart about websites, they have those scrolling websites. They say absolutely nothing. You read them, you can't figure out what the company's doing, but they have a .com. So there's no value until you're ready to launch by being too exposed, unless you've got good patent coverage and you've got an issued patent. So yes, it's a really good question. You have to be careful about what you say, but like a good lawyer would say, and I'm not a lawyer, it depends. Depends what the circumstance is, right? Depends. Give me a scenario, I can tell you what to do about it, So.
Do we have access to slides?
All these slides are on a video
It's recorded.
series.
So
And I'll share the link to the CTSA website where the videos are.
And you can just listen to
Oh,
it
okay.
again if you want to.
Okay, great.
I mean, if you want to listen to it, I would suggest listen to the reimbursement one because there's a bunch of slides I left out.
Okay.
And it'll get you a little more grounded in that mire of stuff.
Right. So I just wanted to thank Rich for the wonderful presentation. But before people start trickling out, I just wanted to say there's a slight date change. March 18th and 19th is the go-to-market strategy. One is in Emory University, the other one is in Georgia Tech. April 22nd is license versus startup, which is here in this room. May 19th is a date change, if I'm not mistaken. It's launching your startup. It's in Georgia Tech. And June 3rd is at APTC, which is also a date change, MedTech Funder Perspective. So I know you remember all this. But feel free to reach out to any of us, or you know how to get to Biolocity or Georgia CTSA. This is co-sponsored by both, so you'll find that.